Good evening, everyone, and those who haven't joined us yet. I see people are still signing up, coming in. My name is Scott Warner, and I'm president of the Culinary Historians of Chicago. And welcome to our evening tonight, where we're fully exposing full frontal facial exposure of the Tribune's hottest new food critics. So I better zip my mouth and not say too much more. But anyway, Louisa Chu and Nick Kindelsperger are the dynamic duo who are doing the food reviews now. Like, food reviews have never been done for the Tribune before. They're both outstanding writers, and they're both culinary experts. I'm going to turn over the intros to Louisa and Nick. They both have tremendous food backgrounds, and if you're not, don't be modest, because you two are not chopped liver. So look forward to hearing what you're saying, and if you leave anything out, I'll throw it in. So step on down and let's hear. Now, Louisa, you want to start off first? You have, your last name starts with C and Nick starts with K, so alphabetically you can go first.
There we go. I so appreciate it. Thank you so much, Scott and Kathy, and to everyone who is joining us live here on Zoom and on Facebook. I'm so appreciative that we have such a big crowd. And my very last in-person event was with your group. So I'm super excited, to be able to join you again. So I am Louisa Chew, and I am a Chicago Tribune food critic. I was born in Hong Kong, raised in Chicago, grew up in my family's Chinese chop suey restaurants on the northwest side of the city. And my very first paid job in restaurants was folding paper takeout menus, which have become so important again during the pandemic. My first cooking job was working the deep fryer at Chinese Pagoda in the Belmont Central neighborhood of Chicago. And I often say that somebody, I'm sure, would be arrested these days, grew up in the restaurant business, and like most immigrant families, my family was very happy that I continued to school, college, and then also was working in journalism and media. And then the immigrant family nightmare happened. I decided to go to culinary school to be a better food journalist. And so at that point, I was living in LA, moved to Paris to attend Le Cordon Bleu. I received a partial James Beard Foundation scholarship to attend. And had I done it differently, and I highly recommend anyone who's considering it, get a full scholarship, don't pay your own way. And so went to Julia Child's alma mater, and so worked in some of the best restaurants in the world, including Alain Ducasse in Paris and El Bulli in Spain, as a stagiaire, an apprentice. And then eventually came back to Chicago, worked as a gourmet magazine correspondent, was a fixer for Anthony Bourdain in Paris and in Spain, and eventually was working as the chef at a very tiny fishing lodge in Alaska. And then the job came up at the Tribune for a reporter. And I have to tell you that this was the only job in the world that I decided I had to stay in Chicago for. It was an incredible opportunity. As we know, I see that there's several Tribune alum in the participants list. And so this was an incredible opportunity. And then after Phil retired, we were very honored and quite frankly lobbied very hard to become the next generation of food critics. So again, thank you so much for having us. And I'm gonna pass it on to my fellow Chicago Tribune food critic, Nick Kindelsperger.
That was wonderful, Louisa. My name is Nick Kindlesperger. I actually grew up in Hanover, Indiana, which is right on the Ohio River, close to Louisville. It's a town of about 2,000 people. I was not much of an eater growing up. I didn't like very many foods. I wrote a play when I was in second grade about exterminating the world's green beans. And it was a really great book, and I'm very proud of it. And so I grew up in this very small town, but that there's a college there called Hanover College. And my dad worked there, and he was very big about how we needed to travel and explore. And you can imagine what it's like to go from a town of about 2,000 people surrounded by cornfields up to a place like Chicago to eat. And I fell in love with Chicago when I was about 10 years old. And it's never been able to get out of my mind since then. So after I graduated from college in Indiana, I moved to New York, and I was just astonished by the amount of food that you can get all around in a big city. It really blew my mind. And I started this food blog called The Paupered Chef, because as much as I loved New York, I had very little money to explore some of the finer dining options there. So a buddy and I did a recipe blog. And while I was there, I met all these different publishers and from different magazines, and I just got hooked up with this food writing world in 2006. And so I've been doing it since then. So I was one of the first writers for Serious Eats when it launched. And I was still in New York. I wrote for Gothamist and the Washington Post and the Brooklyn Paper. And then I moved to Chicago shortly thereafter and started the Serious Eats Chicago blog, which was focused exclusively on Chicago content. And I wrote that, I did that for about 3 years. And then, as Louisa said, sometimes you think you're out of the game. And then the Chicago Tribune called and asked if I'd come back and start writing again. And I couldn't say no. I really should, maybe have thought about it more, but no, it's been outrageous. It's been so much fun. And as Louisa said, we fought really hard for this position. They were not going to keep it. It wasn't, there just wasn't money there. And so we had to make a very well-organized pitch for what we wanted and what we wanted to do. And we're so happy they said yes. And that's me, I guess. So I don't know, Louisa, if we should talk a little bit more about what we're doing now, or.
That one of the things that you mentioned, Nick, which was really kind of like a glimpse behind the scenes, is that when Phil retired, there was serious talk about the budget was completely cut. I mean, we literally at some point heard, I'll say, not to tell tales out of school necessarily, but it was a very, very small number to the point where that's ridiculous. But if that's what needs to be, then we'll figure out how that's going to be, because, for example, a lot of our favorite foods, like our Takeout 100 list, for example, that we've been working on, some of your favorites are like $5, even less, less than $5 tacos. Isn't that right, Nick?
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure. Absolutely. So it's just amazing how much we're trying to sort of bridge the gap between sort of our favorite foods that we eat on an everyday basis and then some of these fine dining meals. And there's a lot more in common, I think, than people realize. And I don't like the separation of the two. I'm obsessed with this new taco place in Little Village, and the person who works the al pastor spit, this is called a trompo because it's loaded with marinated pork. And, if he pauses for a second and doesn't keep it moving because he has to do it by hand, because he has to make sure it browns but next to this flame perfectly. And he cuts off just the the slices are so thin. And if he screws that up, then, the whole thing is ruined. So that's something we're really looking towards.
And just a little tease, again, a spoiler alert, we can give you a little bit of a preview of the 2 reviews that we're working on coming up next, is one of the things also that we were very conscious about in taking over this responsibility of being the new Tribune food critics is equity. And we're very conscious of the kinds of restaurants, food, and people who are involved with the restaurants that we review. And so it just so happens to be that we, consciously needed to have Mexican and Latin American restaurants in our early reviews. And that they, while we very much appreciate a lot of the, big name chefs that, like exactly what Nick was saying, the restaurant in Little Village. And then also my next review happens to be also a Mexican family owned restaurant in the Cragen neighborhood. When I first saw it open, I think I mentioned to you, Nick, it was like, it looks interesting. I'm not sure who this is. Like, does it have any substance to it? And I think that's like a challenge that we often have, is that something might look interesting, like on social media before it ever opens. And we kind of have to decide if there is like substance, like we often like to say, if there's like a fairness to it. So luckily, after I tried it the first time, I was like, I texted you from the table, and I was like, this is so much fun. I think you're on vacation. I was like, this is going to be my next review. I was like, this is so much fun. And so, is making those conscious choices, trying them out, and then also, still critiquing them on a level that recognizes the craft, but also, again, seriously critiquing restaurants, so, a preview of our upcoming restaurant reviews, but also, like, for example, this most recent restaurant review that we published was Rosemary. And, you talked a little bit about, you were not concerned, but, we talked about how, like, and we discussed this, what we're going to be reviewing next, and like the flow, that this was going to be possibly the first, your first negative review.
Correct. Yeah. And I'm a little bewildered by how negative people think it is, because I would consider it more of a mixed review, but because it's such a big name, I think it came across as more negative because of it. But we talked a lot about whether we should even be doing negative reviews right now after what some restaurants have been going through. The past year had, before we were critics and going out to restaurants again, it was one of the hardest years to cover. It was the hardest year to cover restaurants that I'd ever encountered. Just the stories were so similar in so many places, and the struggles were so real. And during that time, Louisa and I felt like my job was to try to help as many restaurants as I could by telling their story, by helping customers find them and enjoy them, and keep, people employed. And then to also just show what they were, the lack of, it was just so hard for them. And I wanted the government to kind of see how hard that was too, and the safety concerns involved. So it was a really tough year to go through. And yeah, I don't know how you feel about that, Louisa. We ultimately came down, I just felt like I was pointing out things. I wasn't trying to go too hard. But do you think it was okay to start that now?
For sure, and again, yeah, and we talked about the process of doing this, that neither one of us are going to be like the classic, like, mean reviewer, that these were going to be critiques in the same way that we would critique any type of other work, whether, the restaurants or literature or music, and spoiler alert, Nick has a music blog, but also, but I want to clarify too, is that over this past pandemic year, which I always like to say is not the same as a calendar year, we never stopped going out to restaurants. Like from the very first night that the first restaurant restrictions were announced, in Oak Park, I went to Katie's in Oak Park. And that was like the first time I got curbside pickup. And that was like, I mean, so as we all know, restaurants were declared essential businesses. We never stopped going out to restaurants for takeout, for curbside pickup, for our, dashboard dining. So as long as restaurants were open, we still kept going. What's different now is that we're, dining on premises and reviewing them. But absolutely, I mean, I think that, but we also were very, we had these conversations, we were very careful about it, about our choices because, to be quite frank, we've talked about it. It's like, there's limited resources with the Chicago Tribune, with newspapers in general right now. And, time and money. And so, does it make sense to go to those places? Like the first place that I wanted to check out because it was a really, big destination place. And, and I didn't know how it was going to be because I hadn't heard anything about it, was Lyrica at Navy Pier. And I basically said that if it was, on the, what did you say, on the curve, I mean, yeah, if we graded on the curve, that Lyrica deserved 4 stars, which is on our scale, the highest rating there is, but on the Tribune scale, which we also really had to clarify too, is, because, now when people look at 1 star for Yelp, that's something bad happened, but like for us, we have to remind people often that, in the Yelp and Google world, that 1 star is still for us, like, good. And I ended up rating them like 1.5 stars, good to very good, because while like the dining experience was not quite there and some of the dishes, some of it was like, this is great, so.
And if you're in Navy Pier, like great doesn't happen that much.
Exactly. You're like ecstatic if you don't have to, I mean, come on.
No.
The flagship.
We talked about it a lot, the stars for that review. I remember, because I was just like, can't be 2. It can't be 2 because like, you wouldn't tell somebody to go there, but so many people are there, it made sense. So these are the kind of things we talk about. And, I think a lot right now, I feel comfortable critiquing places is just, spending over $100 or $200 for a meal is a luxury for most people. And I never want to forget that for most people, spending that kind of money is a lot. And so if you're going to charge that much, then I feel like you're more open to a fair critique.
For sure. And that was also a very conscious choice of, we gave the sneak peek about our 2 upcoming reviews. We should talk a little bit about our very deliberate choices in our first reviews, your first review and my first review. And, we talked about like the whole thing again about like, should we even review restaurants if there was no dining in? Because we were kind of at that point, I mean, and so do you want to talk a little bit about, the choice of your first review, which was our first review in our new era?
Yeah, so this was a place that I came about totally at random. During the pandemic, a lot of places around town started ghost kitchens or virtual kitchens, where they'd have a big area and then 8 to 10 different concepts can go into the space, and there's no dining room, but it's all to-go orders for Uber Eats and all those other things. And I picked up this meal from Soul and Smoke, and I just couldn't believe what it was. I've gone on barbecue tours down in North Carolina and in Texas, and I've been to Memphis multiple times. And I'm a big fan of Chicago barbecue, and just in this foam, the foam clamshell was the best brisket I'd had in Chicago, best barbecue brisket I've had. And so I had to track down who this guy was, and I couldn't find him because it was just ghost kitchen. And eventually I found out he had this place in Evanston, and that he'd actually worked at Moto, which is one of the most high-end modernist cuisine restaurants in Chicago history that unfortunately closed in 2013, I believe. But he had worked there, and he had done like all these crazy cooking events, and but he loved barbecue. He's from the South Side of Chicago. It's just what he loves the most. And so when the pandemic happened, he like really beefed up this barbecue option as a to-go, because it would work better than the catering gigs that he had relied on in the previous years. And so up in Evanston, he has a little kitchen up there where he cooks everything. And so that was my first review. I knew I wanted to do something with it, and then it turned out we just got named the critics at the same time. And so I just thought that this was the perfect way to open up, because when we started, Louisa and I were like, what do we want our reviews to really capture? And I remember something Louisa said so clearly, that we would want to have reviewed Lem's Barbecue on the South Side when it opened, 70 years ago, I think. So we missed that chance, but that's okay. But we want to review places like that are so important to the community, because they cook great food and they want to share that with people in a comfortable environment. So yeah, that worked out pretty nicely as our first official review. And what about you, Louisa?
So I just want to mention about Soul and Smoke. The funny thing about that was that Heather, who is the wife and co-owner of the Soul and Smoke team, was once my assistant when I was working as a consulting chef. And I had met her husband, DeAndre, when they were just two young, crazy kids in love dating, and they had actually cooked the rest of the meals at Moto, actually no, the catering, when very sadly Omar Cantu died by suicide. And so there are these incredibly accomplished young chefs who stepped in and took over at such a critical time. And then I had their food previously and I thought it was great, but it's like over this past year, we were just like scrambling, and I had written about them at a couple of stories, pandemic related, when, for example, when Jose Andres came to town and he delivered meals to workers at a COVID testing site and hospital and school. And DeAndre was one of the chefs that he met. So that was just, just like amazing stories. And I'm so glad when those amazing stories, coincide with great food. And then also that you reviewed it. I mean, because, that is just such a terrific validation of their craft and their work. And then also, this was also super helpful because while we have been in the community long enough where we have established relationships, either, on like just going to restaurants on our own, that was terrific that you were able to review that and with a very, a critical eye that I wouldn't have had to recuse myself from that. But in any case, so my first review was for Dear Margaret, a French-Canadian Midwestern restaurant in Lakeview. And you had first written about them before they opened, their whole plans. And I remember, they had opened, when all the dining rooms were shut down. And I was really concerned, about like what restaurant I was going to review first, because I did actually try another place I was hoping could be the first review. And even though it had been hyped, it was just like, it wasn't quite there, so I was kind of like, oh no, I mean, like,
it had a really good story, but the food wasn't there. And that's
exactly.
See, I think that you think that sometimes you have to have a good story with a restaurant, but I feel like the story has to come second. I know this is a tangent, but
No.
If you get too into the story aspect of it, you can get not charmed by it, but then you cannot evaluate the food in the same way. So fortunately, good food and good stories go along. So there usually is a good story involved, but yeah. Anyway, okay, I'll stop. Yeah. That was a good tangent.
No, exactly. But that's exactly related. And that, we have a chance to check ourselves with that too. And when I tried Dear Margaret, I mean, literally ordered, I took it into my car, and I always plan, like the destination where I'm going to have like a nice, especially because they didn't have any dining on premises. It was takeout only. Grabbed my food, jumped in the car, drove to the place with my little takeout kit. My takeout kit includes, it has to have real silverware, real cloth napkins, and hand wipes. Because I want it to be a nice experience, even from having in my car. And literally from that first bite, I burst into tears. I mean, and I think about that now, and I'm getting teary because I think that it was just such a relief, and that they were doing this beautiful food that, despite everything that had happened over this past year, they were doing this beautiful food that defied the odds. And it was just such a relief. And I was just so grateful that they were doing it. And it was so thoughtful. I mean, everything down to the toast, which I know you're a bread nerd, and it's like a 2 or 3 day process to make this thinly sliced grilled toast, and their, foie gras mousse, which I, written in my review, I used to make every day when I was working as an apprentice in Paris for a while. So I knew what was good and what not good. And if there was a trace of bitterness, and it was so good, so beautiful, and all out of takeout containers sitting in my car. So that kind of incredible food moment, emotional moment, story moment, all of that captured. I mean, we're so lucky that we have a lot of that here in Chicago. So those ended up being our first reviews, and they both ended up being 3 stars. And but after that, we did actually have a serious conversation too about the star situation, and
because a lot of publications have decided to get rid of them because they don't feel like they're fair. And I totally get that side of the argument. It's not that simple, but I like them. And I couldn't get rid of them yet because I think they have value because they help customers decide what they want to do very quickly. I don't know, where are you now on the conversation?
I'm the same. I'm right there with you. I wish that we didn't have to, be reductive down to stars, because again, it is like we were talking, it's confusing because when you see 1 star on Yelp, you're like, oh my God, something really bad has happened,
Yeah.
But on our scale, it's still good. And so I kind of feel like I need to build in some of that explanation every time.
I see.
But having said that, I also find stars very helpful. And I also will admit that I find especially looking for other services, not necessarily restaurants, like Yelp reviews, somewhat helpful. I mean, sometimes they're some of the best ones for having the right website, for example, those nuts and bolts type things.
Mm-hmm.
But it is important for us to have that, critical storytelling and an actual critical review in our actual reviews. And that then the stars of it is almost just kind of that gives people a little bit of an idea about, where we are, what our headspace is. And because a lot of it, I'm sure you do too. It's you have an idea of whose taste aligns with yours, and then they can get a better idea of what that's like to us, and to them. And then that kind of, fits together, meshes together a little bit in terms of, how helpful those stars are actually going to be. But but quite frankly, we had this frank conversation, you and I and our editor, Ariel, that we have to be careful about giving out 3 stars, because.
Yeah, she talked me down. She's talked me down before. One time. And I'm not going to say what it was, but it was very close. I'm okay with it. It's fine. I'm open to the discussion. And I like that we discussed both those things and places that we're going to review next, so that we can make sure we're covering everything that we want to, and that's a priority for us. But yeah, no, it's a lot of things to think about, especially right now. And I was talking to someone who interviewed us both, and she was sort of like, how are you feeling right now? And I'm like, I feel like I'm doing two things at once. Like I'm trying to learn how to do this brand new job that I have, and I'm worrying about the pandemic and all these other very serious issues and the staffing issues that are going on and the rights that they're demanding and whether things are going to be different. You know, it's all happening at once. And I'm sure it's for everybody, it feels that way. But I do feel like we're juggling two things right now.
And it's not only juggling two things, but like the other thing, the restaurant reviews is one thing. The other thing are like really extreme social change. And, not the least of which is the very rightful protests after the murder of George Floyd last year and what that meant and what that triggered in the restaurant industry. The political upheaval that was just last year. It seems like it's like a lifetime ago, So, I mean, and then on top of that, there was still like the social issues that are in restaurants, like, for example, the tank noodle story, which was a terrible situation where, I was just following up on once, we got a press release that from the feds that they had recovered $600,000 for $700,000 for 60 employees for one restaurant in 2 years. And we were like, what? And that's one restaurant. And that wasn't even on like the headlines of like the big issues that we've been covering. So that is something that, takes a lot of time in terms of our coverage. And, then on top of having to actually go out to restaurants and, critiquing them and covering them. Not the least of, but it's not just restaurants. If, again, if I can sort of give a tease about mentioning one of the things that's happening in the city that you're going to be covering, Nick.
Oh, right. So Lollapalooza is here. I'm sure you all are going, and it's going to be, I'm seeing a lot of shaking heads. I wasn't quite sure what I was signing up for when I did it, but now I feel like I have to do it. So I went, 100,000 people are going to be coming each day to Grant Park, and I was going to look at all the food options there because they actually do highlight a lot of local restaurants. Most festivals have very generic food, just a lot of fried stuff, and they really go out of their way. So of course, now with cases rising again, we're taking pretty serious precautions, and we had a safety meeting a few hours ago to talk through everything, and we're all going to be masked up, and we have all the things. Yes. So I think it's moving even for outdoor events, but that's to cover it safely. I don't know any other way to do it besides simply not going, but we'll see.
Yeah.
I hope it's going okay.
Yeah, I hope so too, and fingers crossed. And those are all very important and things that we didn't think that we'd ever have to sign up for doing, as food critics at the Tribune. And but our serious considerations, not only for ourselves and but for our audience, and that and I'm glad. I've never been to Lollapalooza, and I didn't want this to be my first experience. And so you've been there before, you've navigated it.
I have,
and,
yeah.
So what are going to be like, how do you plan on navigating something like this? Are you going tomorrow? Is that right?
Yeah, I'm going to go early,
Yeah.
as soon as I can, and then I'm going to get out of there as soon as I can. So hopefully it's not too big of a deal, but we're going to find out, I guess, in a few weeks to see how this is done. But it's all related too, because if they have to shut down events like that, then it's going to be back to restaurants having closures, and I don't know how many restaurants can withstand another shock like that. So all of these things matter to the city as a whole, and so we're having to think about public health issues, which is real fun to research. And but they're so important to how we interact with restaurants, and that's what's so exciting. It's exciting too to think about restaurants in this way too, because restaurant owners are such passionate people, and they care about these issues too. So talking to them and learning from them too has been very instructive to how I approach everything.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely. Yeah. I am currently still only dining outside or next to a big open window because I have 86 and 87-year-old mom and pop Chew who had been in lockdown. You know, they're now kind of in they have an open door policy, you know, for good behavior. And I took them to 88 Marketplace for the first time. So that was quite an adventure. The big new Chinese grocery store, supermarket, super center in just outside of Chinatown. And so we wrote about every restaurant that was open there. And there's actually 2 new places that we have to get back to add to.
Oh,
the
that's
steakhouse
right,
that you're gonna go to maybe because they only have indoor dining. So who knows how they're gonna handle that.
Have to be quick.
You know, either that or get takeout, because I went to the hot pot place where you actually dined in that little window, and I got takeout from there last fall and it was great, but not everybody has a hot pot a rig at home. You know, and I took all the food, you know, out to my car to eat, and I plan on doing that for the new Hong Kong style diner that just opened there too. But yeah, but you know, I think about like the day that you and I went to go shoot photos, that we were sitting outside of First Gibson's Italia, you know, for the big food critic announcement. And then we went to Jim's on Maxwell Street for Polish and the famous Chicago style bone-in pork chop sandwich. And that was the day that the CDC said, done, masks are over. We're like, oh, that was sudden, you know. And so it was like, fingers crossed, everybody. But so far so good, you know, knock on wood.
Yeah, I've had multiple COVID tests throughout this thing. So just had one come back today. So I'm trying to be as careful as I can. I have a 7-year-old daughter, so we have to, until she can get vaccinated, there are issues there. And so it was crazy how quickly it went from everything is locked up to everything is full. I wasn't expecting that to be so quick. And people are just so happy to be out again. And I totally understand that. I just don't want it to go back if for the restaurant's sake. But we have to follow the public health advice. So,
right. Exactly. Bars, restaurants, grocery stores, which again, were some of the fundamental essential businesses that were open. I was going to mention that go ahead and ask questions from our very engaged audience.
Yeah, and Kathy will ask the chat questions, and I see there's some wonderful questions out there. And I'll start off with a few direct questions to both of you. How do you do it? I mean, how do you eat in restaurants all the time without wanting to be bulimic? I don't know, or how, you know, how do you eat like that and taste things all the time? Is it hard, or what's your secret to doing this job? Everybody think what a wonderful job as a food critic, and how many times do you get horrible meals? I mean, well, that's another part of the question, but how do you eat like that without feeling sick to your stomach all the time?
Yeah, it's a relevant question. We both have very different answers, I believe, because we've gotten this one before, but I'm a firm believer in exercise and eating vegetables when you're at home. And then if something's not good, just leave it. And so there's a lot of times where I'll have just a couple bites of something and then I'll just stop because I know it's not good. There's a few like very quick tips. Never eat the fries. The fries are there to pull you down. Don't drink any soda. And then, really enjoy the food when it's good. So I never get tired of eating the really good stuff. And I bike a lot. I bike everywhere I can.
I believe in exercise in the same way that I believe in everyone can have their own beliefs. I personally.
So you didn't bike 10 miles today
I
like
did
I
not.
did? Okay.
I did not. I am a hot and sweaty mess as it is right now. I have what I like to say is the 3-bite rule. I like to try to take at least, but no more than 3 bites of everything. And I am also a big doggy bagger. So if I know that I'm going to be at a restaurant where I'm going to have dessert, I typically always like to go look ahead at the dessert menu because those almost always have ice cream. And if it's like a really great restaurant with great ice cream, I know that I've got to eat all the ice cream because you cannot doggy bag that. So I kind of plan that, do that mental calculus ahead, and backwards. But Nick says, don't eat the fries. But we did a story all about the best French fries, hand-cut French fries in Chicago under $5. And
I know.
I know.
That was the exception. We could eat fries and not anything else, then it was okay.
But having said that, we kind of use still the same rule where it's like, I tried to only have like 3 bites of French fries, no matter how good we as a team at the time, and it was like, we enlisted other reporters. It was like about other journalists. It was like about over 100 places that we tried. And then
we had a matrix that, we had different brackets to get people into it. And
yeah.
It was pretty elaborate.
Yeah. But, but restrained and I do try to have luckily my dog Cole Chew, he is the best, world's best personal trainer. So that helps. So restraint and some exercise for me.
What do you both think the background for a food critic should be? What are the prerequisites to be a food critic? Like Louisa, I know you're a trained chef and you're an outstanding writer. And Nick, I know you're an outstanding writer. And I'm sorry, what is your food background, Nick?
So I started writing about food in 2006, that's right. And so I did a column for Serious Eats where I had to cook a dinner every single night. It was called Dinner Tonight. I did that. I wrote 3 of those a week for 6 years.
Wow.
So over the top of that, I would go to the Harold Washington Library, go to the cookbook section, take a cookbook off, photograph the meals that were easy-ish that I could get done in an hour, and then I would go cook them at home and write about them. And so I did that for 6 years. So I have an extensive home cooking background. Before I was at the Trib, actually wrote a column for Epicurious about home cooking. And so home cooking has been a really big part of this process. And I think that it distinguishes Louisa and I, that we both have this, we can both cook in the kitchen and then try to evaluate it on the plate at a restaurant. I think it informs us in a different way. I am much more conscious of how much something costs because I know how much those ingredients cost. I know how much time it would take me to make it. And so if I can do that cost balance in my head while I'm eating, which is unfortunate sometimes, but I think it's instructive to readers too.
And it seems both of you aren't doing what I typically think of as a food review where people just discuss the food, like the lettuce was wilted and but the vinaigrette saved it with its lavender essence or something. I mean, you're like when you talk about your first review, Margaret, I looked at that. It actually came in my email from the Trib, and it was a story. There was so much more going on than just about the food. I don't know how you did it. I mean, you're both of you are such wonderful writers, and you're food authorities. You're a trained chef again from Cordon Bleu. But I said, I was just trying to look at your writing and trying to dissect it and figure out how did she transition? What examples is she throwing in? Where is this the information you were giving, and it still was a food review, and I have that on my list now of a restaurant I have to go to. But both of you, I mean, what percentage of the meals, like if you eat in 100 restaurants, how many of them are worth reviewing? Don't you get a lot of bad food when you're out reviewing? So anyway, and how do you cull who gets reviewed? How many make the cut? Yeah.
Yeah, how many make the cut is a much smaller number. You know, I mean, because that's kind of different criteria. But you know, I also wanted to go back a little bit to what you're saying as far as like, you know, what kind of background people should have. And, you know, I think fundamentally it should be like a serious enthusiasm about food, you know, and as far as the, you know, actually ability to cook and training, that's a bonus. And then also depending on the medium, you know, we happen to be right now in terms, you know, we happen to be talking about, you know, reviews in terms of writing. So whatever medium you're talking about, you know, whether it's going to be video or audio. So, you know, understanding that medium and then your audience. So it really so varies. I think luckily, and maybe it's just, again, because we're so enthusiastic about food, you know, I haven't had that many terrible experiences, you know. I mean, I think I've seen some, you know, hope in just about every place that I've had a chance to visit. There, you know, I had like,
yeah, no, I mean, we're very careful about the places. We do a lot of research beforehand. And so we don't just wander about and walk into this restaurant, you know, as much fun as that would be. We have to like look up the food. Usually these places have Instagram profiles and Facebook pages. And so you can actually tell a lot by how the food looks from a picture. And I would never evaluate my own personal opinion on that, but it can help us narrow places to things that look exciting and then, go from there.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of it right now is, you know, I mean, what does our audience want from a review? And a lot of it, quite frankly, is new restaurants. And, you know, we kind of have to justify to ourselves, and because potentially it's going to be justifying to our audience is, you know, why would we be reviewing a place? I mean, like over this past pandemic year, there definitely are going to be places that we're going to be doing a full-on review that opened, you know, like last year. But before that, there has to be a justification to ourselves, each other, our editor, and because eventually our audience is going to ask those same questions, you know, and then also we're very mindful, you know, as you mentioned, in terms of equitable coverage. In the Chicago Tribune historically has not covered a huge part of our city. You know, the South Side, the West Side, you know, Black-owned restaurants, you know, Mexican-owned restaurants, Chinese restaurants, you know, I mean, like food stalls. And so we're very conscious of the places that, because we're so enthusiastic about the places we like to eat ourselves, is that's going to also be potentially the kind of restaurants that, you know, you might want to read reviews about, because that's also really changed fundamentally in terms of like, you know, like Nick was saying, it's $100 is a big deal. And, you know, especially in this past year, who's splashing out that much, and how does that justify a review?
And my last live question before we turn it over to these intriguing chat questions. Well, since Phil Vettel came out and put his picture in the Trib and said there's no sense in trying to be anonymous, every time he goes everywhere, everybody knows who he is. But are you recognized a lot when you go into the restaurants, or how important is your anonymity, or are you still anonymous even though you're out up front with everybody saying, here's my picture, here's who I am? Any problem with anonymity, or do you need anonymity?
I thought about it, but a lot of it has to go to, if a restaurant wants to know what you look like, they'll find out. And so, as Phil noted correctly, he would walk into a place and they would know exactly who he was. You know, the kitchens have known how to do this for years. And on the other side, Louisa and I are trying to, and have been reviewing places that genuinely do not care. what we look like, because they aren't, they have been neglected from coverage, so they're not expecting us to walk through. So why would they care who we are? So the majority of my meals, I don't think the restaurant owners have any idea who I am. Do you feel the same way, Louisa?
Yeah, I had mentioned, the good thing is that middle-aged Asian women are invisible to society anyway. Middle-aged women in general, but also, yeah, it's like, I'm pretty sure that of all the places I've reviewed so far, no one's recognized me. I mean, even though, yeah, the idea of anonymity in general, privacy in general, is kind of, a myth for the most part, with social media, cameras everywhere, that sort of tracking, is that a lot of the places, yeah, it's like, if they had no idea and they didn't care at all, and then in fact, one of the restaurants, the next restaurant I'm reviewing, it took me days now to talk to somebody, involved with the restaurant, just to like arrange the photo shoot and interview the.
Me too. I'm having really a tough time with this next place.
Yeah, they're like, no, the Tribune, why, like, suspicious, totally. Like, what do you want? So it's not like PR is pounding down our door.
Well, and I'm dealing with the language barrier. I can speak a little Spanish and I can read Spanish pretty well, and so I'm trying to text with owners because I feel more comfortable. Because they don't speak English, and that's what I'm dealing with right now. But I'm glad to do it. I'm so happy to do that.
Yeah, totally. And so anonymity has not been an issue either way so far for the kinds of restaurants that we are really interested in reviewing.
And years ago, I interviewed that wonderful guy, Pat Bruno, the late Pat Bruno, who was the Sun-Times food critic and one of my big mentors in life. And I asked him about anonymity. He said, even if they know who I am, they can't change what's going on in the kitchen anyway. It's not going to affect the food that they serve me. So I thought that was interesting. And you know what? Now I'm going to turn for dessert, our dessert course, we're going to get the questions from our wonderful audience. So Kathy, could you do the chat part?
I know this is probably a redundant question, but I just want to start in order, and maybe there was a detail you wanted to highlight. But can the speakers talk about why the Tribune didn't want to keep food critic positions? I think you covered it, but maybe there's some detail you wanted to add.
Money. It costs a lot of money. We have to pay for our meals, and so you think about it, you have to pay us, and then you have to pay for our budget. And if we don't have a budget, we can't do that thing. And so we had to, that was basically it. If we, I think we proved our worth, and that's why they gave us these positions, and I think we're doing okay. But if we don't do a good job, then the money always wins out.
Disappears.
Yeah.
Is it a kind of a rule of threes? I always had this impression that professional reviewers went at least 3 different times. Is that still the case, or that's just not?
Usually now it's 2 reviews. I'm sorry, 2 visits.
We have a 2 minimum or max minimum. We kind of, I think it used to be 3 visits with multiple people, and that's not the case anymore. I think we can do 2 instead of 4. I mean, these are very practical things that when you add it up, it just multiplies.
Sure. Yeah.
And so, you can, it's all very sort of interesting, I guess, to us only, but they're very practical money matters that we have to think about.
Absolutely.
And it's the time we live in too, I mean, it's like typically, it's 2 visits, and a lot of times I go by myself because it is just easier in terms of, again, budget means 2 things for everybody, whether it's the Tribune food critics or, everyone at home. It's time and money. How do you budget it?
Absolutely. Peggy Wolf said, by the time your food is served, do you get the feeling, since they know who you are, which may or may not be the case from your comments, your table could have passed the White House background check?
I don't know. So they're saying that the food would look just better, or like.
I think we're going back to that earlier question. If they recognize you, are they going to do you something better, and you're going to have been, everything vetted more carefully.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I actually was a waiter at one point when I lived in London for a little bit, which I left out of the whole story. But and Louisa has worked at a number of high-end restaurants, and the time that a plate goes from the kitchen to the table, how many seconds are we talking about, Louisa? What do you think?
I mean, again, when I always remember, it's like when I worked at some of the world's best restaurants, there's only so much that you can do. Give maybe somebody like a nicer looking lobster claw, or like a better cleaned off plate. But number one, for sure, I have not been recognized at any restaurants. And then like, whether it's going to be, a lobster claw or barbecue, there's only so much that you can do in terms of making a dish different. I will tell you that I did notice that in my last review on George's deep dish on pizza, the photos and this has happened, before. I mean, everything from like, say, Billy Goat Burgers for a story that was shot. And, even though Nick and I do shoot a lot of photos ourselves, and Nick's like burger story, he shot like almost all the photos in that story. And, I noticed that the pizzas were a lot more loaded than the ones that I actually took myself. They're so great. But in terms of like when we're actually dining in, I haven't been recognized in that situation at the Tribune, yet. And there's.
I should add that we never make reservations in our own names. I usually just show up at a restaurant and try to get in at a random time on a Tuesday instead of trying to go at a specific time. So we never broadcast that we're going to a place, just to make that clear.
And you don't bring your relatives and go, that's a food critic.
My mom tries to do that to me.
I don't consider myself a food critic, but my family has pulled that a couple of times, and I did not like it. Gary Fine said, what are your plans about doing a formal review, such as for a restaurant like Ever and other nicer restaurants?
One has to open. It's a very practical answer. We're at the sort of higher mid scale right now. So places that are in the West Loop, like Rosemary and Andros Taverna, I've reviewed in Logan Square, which is a really beautiful Greek restaurant that I really enjoy. And so Alinea has a new restaurant coming out pretty soon, I believe. I haven't heard many updates on it, but that's going to be a very high-end restaurant, and we will review it. So Louisa and I might have to fight over who gets to review it. What do you think?
No, I think I will fight that we should review it together for something like that, because that's exactly the sort of situation where, we talked about, again, the budgeting of resources, time and money. And for a situation like that, I think it would be really important if we had like that sort of, world-class restaurant like the Alineas, or like, we were talking about. It's like I worked at El Bulli and at Ducasse in Paris. It's really important. It would be really important for both of us to have that experience and to bring both of our perspectives to that. So if, like when the new Alinea opens, we should be reviewing that together.
Fair enough. George Eberhardt, because I'm just going in order, not trying to censor, but what do you think of the new Tribune ownership? You get your check in the mail, right?
Right now, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't been very communicative with us, so I can't say anything on a personal level, except for they haven't signaled that they're gonna hire more people or do that. So, yeah.
I am a union leader at the Tribune, and had reported, over a number of events prior to Alden Global Capital officially taking over, that their playbook was very bad for not only the Chicago Tribune, and journalism, but our communities in general. And I have the legally protected right, as we all do, but especially as a union leader, to say that. So it does not bode well, for our communities. As far as how it affects me personally right now, it hasn't really so much, except for the fact that, yeah, we are really loaded with a lot of extra work because we have we have fewer people to do it. So
we have less than half as been the number of employees in the food department than we did last year.
Yeah.
So we went from 8 to 9 to 3. We have 3 basically people.
Yeah.
With our editor 4.
So I definitely am not done fighting for the Trib, our community, and so that's how I feel about that.
Oh, fair enough. Anne Marie inquired, could you comment on vegetarian and vegan options in mainstream restaurants?
That's a really good idea. Louisa has a lot of opinions on that.
I am what I like to say, PVPO, personally vegan, professionally omnivorous, at home. On my own time, my own dime, I like to say, I like to eat vegan for a lot of different reasons. And one of the hottest stories in recent months was about the Bona beefless beef, which I thought was a game changer. Because it really, I think, brought plant-based dining, which is, kind of, what people are calling it now, to the, general audience. And using a very Chicago iconic food was brilliant. But we're definitely seeing, much more options, across the board, which I think is terrific because, Gen Z kids are, that's really what they want. That's really what they're asking for a lot of different reasons.
And chefs are really into it too. That's what they're most excited about cooking with often. Sometimes I meet a chef and he's like, man, meat's so boring. We just like the vegetables is the fun part. So you can taste that as a diner, I think, these days.
Cool. Gary Fine said, if you're not giving critiques of poor restaurants, how would we treat your reviews? Are you only writing positive reviews? Would you give a negative review to a small ethnic family-owned restaurant? What about really poor restaurants?
Yeah, these are all good questions. I think we do address the first part, but attacking a restaurant, feels, I don't know, attacking. If we could review more restaurants, we would review more restaurants. If we had more money, Louisa and I would do even more. I think there's a sort of general public good that comes from sort of reviewing as many places as possible, but I do not feel comfortable critiquing a small family run restaurant that I guess doesn't deserve it. It depends on what you think, a restaurant could deserve, but I wouldn't write about them. And if it was sort of a place someone asked me about, I would be honest and say I don't like it. We have to be so careful with the stories we write because we have such limited resources right now. And so that also adds to the equation. I don't know what do you think, Louisa? I felt like I rambled a bit there. That was hard.
No. It's a hard topic, and I would first clarify is that the preferred term generally now is, it used to be ethnic, is, possibly international or traditional, because ethnic restaurant just has I think, a bit of a problematic perception to it. And I know that it's a difficult thing to capture, but that is what we do. We work with words and we try to capture ideas and concepts. So rather than ethnic, I like to call these, international restaurants, perhaps, and traditional rather than authentic. That's another word that I think is problematic. But I think, and again, a poor restaurant, I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that word either. Maybe like a smaller restaurant that has like maybe fewer resources. But for example, like I did mention earlier, is that, you know, the restaurant that I thought I was going to review first, just was, had, like I said, had a lot of hype. But when I actually tried it, I realized I don't know that the other people who wrote about it actually tried it. And this place right now has a lot of potential, but it is not really quite ready for a review. And so we discuss it, and then it is still on my list to review, but there has to be a reason why. And I do think that it is fair to critique a small family-owned immigrant restaurant or food stall or stand or whatever. We have to ask why. You know, I mean, like, why are we going to be spending this time, the money and resources to do that if it's no good? You know, I mean, why would we do that? Not saying that we would pull our punches, you know, but it's like the critique has to make sense on so many different levels. So absolutely, there will be cases that is going to be maybe a place that has a lot of hype, and that we need to critique it and not and not rate it very highly. But we absolutely will. I will do that if it's necessary. But again, it's a matter of resources.
Peggy Martin said, in your writing, can you keep the public aware of how restaurants are still struggling? While we are all thrilled to be dining in person, they are dealing with significant staffing shortages and working so hard to keep things afloat every day. I don't think anybody disagrees with that.
Yeah. And I think that was especially, you know, like, again, our first reviews really met that head on, you know, Dear Margaret, which Nick had reported on before they opened, you know, and like how it was just basically one person, you know, the co-owner who was running the whole front of the house. And, you know, now they're still only able to roll out, you know, limited indoor dining. And I mentioned that in the review. And, you know, and Nick, you know, went to Apollonia and like,
yeah, I went to Apollonia and with my mom, who was up from, you know, Southern Indiana, and she was so excited to go out and eat in the big city. And the AC went out in the restaurant and it was 90 degrees outside, and there were no curtains on the windows, and it was these floor to ceiling windows. And so it just started baking inside. And then they have a wood fired oven.
Oh no.
And, you know, I didn't know what to do. And we luckily had a great meal. And, you know, I was just asking the chef, like, you know, what happened? And he's like, we ordered curtains. They're just in the, you know, the pandemic slowed them down by 6 months. So they're in the mail. You know, what am I supposed to do? And so that was a case where I was just like, you're exactly right. There's nothing you could do. So I tried to make light of it. You know, I wanted to say that it happened because it was kind of funny, and that, but I was very conscious that, you know, if he hadn't opened the restaurant, even if it wasn't perfect, he could have lost the restaurant because they are dealing with so much right now. So I feel like maybe in the review, I could have done a better job. And I thought a lot about this review. And so I'm not above admitting that I could have done better to capture that. And so I'm going to try to do better in my next reviews, I guess.
So in a review, is there a review of the newly opened Verzani Patisserie on the horizon for one of you? And let me also maybe ask that question. At what point do you really anticipate doing a review of any restaurant? Because when they just opened, there's a lot that's still not ironed out.
I think that patisserie has been open for a little bit.
I have no idea. But
Yeah, and I'd have to check back. I have actually been keeping a list, and this was like one of what we used to help lobby, was like all the restaurants open since, you know, last year to now. And it would take, that's probably not on a current list of restaurants, you know, to review for me, you know, or for us right now, I don't think, Nick. You know, because again, it's a matter of like time and resources and which ones, you know, do we need to focus on? And then, for example, you know, when we review them, it depends. Like, for example, like we had talked about possibly reviewing, I was considering possibly reviewing Haleo. I think that popped up in the chat earlier, and we'll get to that question later. And that, you know, like a bigger restaurant like that, that is, you know, like the 5th of a worldwide chain, you know, could be visited for their first review visit like the next week that they're open. Other restaurants, you know, just because we're playing catch up and everything right now, you know, we would normally wait a little bit probably, but like a bigger restaurant, it just depends, you know, on the situation.
So we have somebody who really reads the Tribune. You need those people. They said the new Trib seems to have the reviews and recipes in all different places, not the same section of the paper, no longer any frequent summary section of the year's reviews. Can you try to get them to organize the food coverage and reviews more logically? But you know they're reading. This is the best part.
Yeah, it was totally right. And we've lost our editor and we lost our editor's editor in the past few months. And so we're playing catch up, and we hope to have things continually get better, but you're right.
We lost our section. I mean, we used to have a Wednesday food section, and that went away because that is, quite frankly, I mean, it is the, you know, it's the irony is that most people read the news online, but everybody wants their story in print. You know, and so it's a challenge. We're aware of it, and
in my reaction, I think with the digital world is you print a story or it's highlighted or linked to on Facebook, and then I see it in the print edition 1 or 2 days later, and it feels like old news. It's not your fault, it's just the way it feels. Are you excited to try the new eatery by Jose Andres? We ate at his same named place in DC. Delicious.
That's a Leo.
Yeah.
And so I can't wait to see what he does. And I hope that he can make it distinctive to Chicago, because this is, you know, one of many that he has. And so that's the question that we're going to try to ask is, how is it relevant to what's going on in Chicago right now?
Yeah. Yeah, I am super interested in trying it eventually. I think that I, you know, might wait on that because, you know, again, it is, you know, I talked to Jose when he was in Spain, you know, for the story about that opening up, and, you know, and maybe wait until he gets to town closer to see if there's like any tweaks after he visits. But there's a lot of other maybe more interesting restaurants right now that we want to get to reviewing, but I'm very excited about it though at the same time.
Peggy Wolf said, any defining moment so far? You've only had what, 2 months, but who knows?
I would get back. I need a little time for defining moments. I love that question. I just we've been so busy. I haven't even had time to really look back yet.
Yeah,
that's how I feel. I don't want to speak for Louisa.
Yeah, no, I think that you know, personally, in terms of dining out, you know, a few moments here and there, like you know, like I was saying with Dear Margaret, you know, that first taste that I had was just such an emotional charge and such a huge, like, you know, wash of relief. And then recently, this restaurant that I dined out at, it was like this like absurd scenario that happened. It was like live music and flan and the police, and I was just like, what's happening? It's just like, this is so different than a year ago. So yeah, so I think from all experiences so far, it's been terrific in those moments, but defining moment yet, I'm not sure yet.
So Tom Matuch said, you naturally have personal tastes in food. So how difficult is it to be objective in your reviews?
That's a really great question. I focus a lot on cooking technique. And so I don't know how a dish necessarily is supposed to taste to the specific chef, but you can taste when food is cooked well, and how, if the bread is burnt, if the crust is soggy, if, things along those lines can help a little bit. I always feel grossly inadequate, and so I try to read as much as I can. So I love going still to the Harold Washington Library and researching about cuisines I don't know very much of, because I just find it endlessly fascinating, and I never know it all. It's just every time you think you might know, but it's just so exciting to look up another cuisine that I might not know much about, and then apply that to what I'm looking at. I don't know. I could do that forever. That's just so much fun.
Well, it's also you're preparing yourself so you're a better reviewer.
Yeah, let's go. I like that. That's good.
A lot of it is luckily that we have the freedom to choose what we're going to review and then what we're going to order. And so I think a lot of it is bringing to it places that we really want to go to and things that we really want to eat. And, so far there haven't been any dishes. Like one of my things that I hate is kind of that middle ground of sweet peppers, like in a lot of Chinese takeout food. I never order that. So I wouldn't order that for necessarily a restaurant that I review, or, that specializes in sweet peppers and food like that.
I want to meet the restaurant that does that. Thanks for the reassurance that stars from a food critic are helpful guidance, with the awareness that 1 star does not mean bad. Perspective is everything. A negative Yelp review complaining about the high price of a bowl of oatmeal made us determined to try Traders Point Creamery farm-to-table restaurant in the Loft in Zionsville, Indiana. And they also wanted to know, what do you think of Dwell Social?
I don't know Dwell Social. Do you, Louisa?
No, I don't either. But I do know Traders Point, and I was going to say I did know that they actually had a dining option, so that's exciting to know.
Okay, so think about the diverse ethnicities and cultures in Chicago's restaurant scene. Now think about the classic dishes of those ethnicities and cultures. Can you talk about which restaurants are working hard to preserve the classic tradition, and what restaurants are doing some really good novel twists on the classics?
Do you want to go first, Louisa? Or
No, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm mostly just, I'm interested in people who, I don't know how to put this in a way. I'm just interested in people that are trying really hard to do something, and then I let that kind of follow where it is. And so I can't speak to individual cuisines in that specific of a manner. I just, I become fascinated with, I found this woman in Berwyn who was making the best flour tortillas that I'd ever had in my life. Chicago's a corn tortilla town. We have some of the best corn tortillas anywhere, and flour tortillas aren't as popular because we haven't had the Mexican population from those specific states that have immigrated here. But this lady she had moved from northern Mexico, and so she had this incredible recipe. Was that a trend or just one person? And so I just was very happy to highlight that one person that was doing that. And I hope it becomes a trend, is how I feel about these things. I hope there's just more great food that people are inspired to make.
I'll say Kathy knows, Kathy, that I'm a big fan and defender of chop suey style restaurants, because that is a valid cuisine category. And I think that, when it comes to ethnicities and traditions, that can be tricky. For example, when we did the guide on the new Koreatown in the northwest suburbs of Chicago, I know Kathy mentioned there's an exhibit coming up there. There are some restaurants that are doing super traditional, classical, types of banchan. And I love that, super like traditional stuff that you would find, here and in Korea, which you'll also find in Korea and in Seoul, is like super wild, creative karaoke style food, that's like drinking bar food that's got like cheese and all sorts of, the corn and like the bubbling cauldrons of this and that. And it's like, so, and so some of that really adapts. I think that sometimes what I get concerned about is, the idea that certain ethnicities and traditions get, kind of captured, and they were only supposed to do it in that way. It evolves around the world and here in Chicago too.
Another avid reader. Both Nick and Louisa usually talk about the personality and background of the restaurant owners and chefs. It adds so much added interest to their reviews. Pat on the back.
Thank you. But it's all due to the restaurants. They're all fascinating. So when you get to know these like people, it's just so interesting. I don't know why I would leave it out. Why would I do that?
Yeah, totally. Thank you so much. And it is definitely, it's like, when you're having something, you're like, what is this? Who made this? What's the story behind it? And luckily we get to be like professional busybodies and go and ask people.
There is a new kosher fish and dairy restaurant opening up in Lincolnwood called Nuevo. One needs to make reservations online. I guess that's a tip for you all. Speaking of background of owners and chefs, especially for mom and pop restaurants, how would you be able to get that if you don't happen to share their language? Wow.
As I mentioned earlier, I'm actually doing that right now with the chef, and I do Duolingo every morning because I'm trying to improve my Spanish. I'm on day 911 of Duolingo, and I'm very proud of myself. But I'm texting with the chef because I can know a little better on Spanish. When it comes to other languages, usually we have to involve a younger their son or daughter that can usually help us out. Usually there's a way, and we try to find a way, I guess, because we want to tell those stories.
Okay, I just mentioned really quick is that the Duolingo owl gave up on me, Nick, long ago. Yeah, but and that, creativity. I quite frankly, Google Translate is super helpful. And, like Nick was saying, texting really helps. And speaking in the same language doesn't necessarily mean that you will understand each other. Like, for example, when we did the recent 88 Marketplace Guide, there was a couple of places where it's like, between me and my mom and dad, we speak like every dialect pretty much that's there. And, sometimes there's a cultural difference. And then like, sometimes you hit something and they're like there's a place in Northeast where they had this one, black rice congee. And I was like, ooh. And then I was like, do you have a cold? And it was like, click with the one, the cashier. She was like, yes. And then suddenly that like unlocked, a whole different level. But I started speaking fluently to people who spoke that Northeast dialect. And she's just like, I don't know if you get it, so language isn't always the barrier.
Okay, how has the cost of curbside carryout, packaging, presentation affected restaurants' profitability in these challenging COVID times?
Oh, that's a great question. We really looked into how restaurants were differentiating themselves during the height of the pandemic, especially with their takeout. And a lot of restaurants came up with some really creative ways to do takeout. I'm not a huge fan of takeout. Louisa is, and so she can probably speak to that. It's been really interesting how it's developed, how it's had to develop, but it certainly costs more to do the more elaborate things.
I have to say, I wish that there was a little bit, I was hoping that there was a little bit more of like an experiential takeout, and there wasn't, but that's okay. Like most takeout experiences have been really terrific. And I think that though, while yes, there has been more in terms of cost of materials for takeout, that has to be balanced also with like, the savings, if you will, from the cost of dining in. I think that sometimes people talk, concern about like the waste and all that, and having worked in restaurants, I'm like, just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not there. How much waste do you think goes into like, making a beautiful plate? as opposed to like having a takeout box, which I often say that's free Tupperware.
Was Phil Vettel really that anonymous anyway in the later years? Probably not.
No, I mean, yeah, I don't want to. The one story I always know is that PR agents would sometimes just email him the next day and say, "How was your meal?" Because they would know that he had been there. He did a really good job of not getting his face out there, but they all had the picture of the places that wanted to know. It wasn't like every restaurant cared, I guess.
Oh no, and Phil was pretty, upfront about it. Was that he did the job for like over 30 years, and he's a pretty distinctive looking guy, so people knew who he was. And again, you develop relationships over time. I mean, just in terms of reporting and covering. So for the most part, he's pretty public about saying people knew who he was anyway.
I, by the way, have heard of one restaurant where there was somebody who was especially prickly and unpleasant online about this restaurant. They went and found his image online and had it in the kitchen because if he ever showed up, they wanted to throw him out. So it goes beyond restaurant criticism sometimes. Did either of you try Elizabeth during its year-long, very affordable carry-out only period? It became our favorite place, and when they reopened, they gifted us with a free meal.
I did not try it, but that sounds lovely. I became obsessed with a place near me that really took care of me for some takeout meals. So the sort of relationships that you can develop with a neighborhood restaurant are just beautiful.
Oh, just really quick. No, I did not. But I follow them on Instagram, as we're talking about, where you see like a lot of the beautiful food, and hope someday we'll be visit up like at the inn, but they did beautiful food, and that's great.
Do you respond to your readers' suggestions for restaurants to review?
Yeah, I love it when people suggest places to me. I sometimes know the place, and so, but there are many times when I don't, and so I always appreciate it. I'm gonna not base my decisions solely on what they say, but I'll take into consideration. I deeply appreciate it.
Yep, we love tips, especially if we're trying to cover like certain thematic things like burgers or dumplings or whatever. Yes, please send us tips.
How do you choose restaurants to review? What is your criteria, or are your criteria?
I mean, as we said, we don't have a strict criteria, except that we discuss everything as a group, and we try to be as diverse and inclusive as we can be, and not forget about certain sections of the city. So if we review a view of a certain kind of restaurant, we want to make sure we try other ones. And yeah, we also want to make sure that we're excited about it or have something interesting to say.
And by the way, why do so many Chinese eateries insist on putting those stupid little corn cobs in the takeout dishes, which the next person said kids like the little corn cobs in their takeout? How's about that? We're winding down here pretty quick.
You know who else loves baby corn? This guy. Okay, I love the baby corn. And actually, I would love to see, especially in the Chicago area, Midwest, somebody actually using little tiny fresh baby corn cobs, because you can find those at some of the markets. So yeah, I love baby corn.
By the way, do you pretend like you're eating corn on the cob and do a mini version of that?
No, but I'll dig them out.
No, you got to be the giant going, like that. That's what I do, but that's a whole other thing.
Anyway, I think we're about finished, but they did want to let us know that Dwell Social is bringing heat and eat at-home meals from Chicagoland restaurants to suburban pickup spots. Restaurants like Demera, Ethiopian, Irazu, Empoli, Manny's, Purple Pig, and such. And Verzeni's owner and pastry chef Arishaya Farhin, sorry if I mispronounced, has been selling her pastries at Green City Market for many years, and she's French trained. The grand opening of her long-awaited brick and mortar store was today, which is too early to do anything for, right? Probably, maybe, I don't know. That's not mine. This has been super, but I think we've run out of questions, which is great. Scott, do you want to say something?
Just thank you for your delicious, savory, sometimes tart talk. And thank you so much. It's a pleasure seeing both of you. And we're really honored to have you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It was really fun.
Yes,
Great.
thank you so much, Kathy and Scott and everyone who joined us tonight. And seriously, we so appreciate it. And please, let's continue the conversation. I mean, Kathy and Scott know how to get in touch with us and they know where we live. And yeah, please.
And we love suggestions, so please keep those coming.
I'm emailing you one right as soon as this is over.
Great.
And I'll send you a copy of the chat, though pretty much we worked through it all, but just in case there's something you're missing. Thanks again.
Thank you.
And
Thanks,
Bye,
everybody.
everybody.
Stay
Bye.
weather alert tonight. We got some strong storms coming in.
Derecho, I know.
Yes,
Take care.
definitely. Good night, all.
Thanks
Bye.
all. Good night.
Bye.